wanted to wait a little bit before commenting on that press conference that Pete Hegseth had regarding how this administration feels about the lack of support they feel they're getting from our NATO allies. I actually understand how they feel. And I hope I can put this into a scenario that people will understand. I saw things similar to this when I worked at EEOC. This is the scenario. You would have a work environment where you would have a very toxic boss, and they would just harass people unmercifully, and everybody would complain about them. It was pretty common knowledge how horrible this person would be. And finally, one person would stand up and say, "Oh, enough, I'm not going to take this anymore." And so this person would come to our office and file a complaint, completely convinced that everybody in their office was going to be supportive. And we would have to tell them, no, they're not. And they would argue with us, and they would say, "No, you don't understand. It's horrible." And everybody agrees it's horrible. And we would say, "No, you don't understand people. You are filing this complaint without their consent. You hope they're going to stand with you, but you're dragging them into drama that they didn't sign on for. Because if they wanted to be part of this drama, they'd be standing next to you filing a complaint. And they're not standing next to you filing a complaint. That tells you something about where they're willing to stand during this investigation. Don't count on them." And nobody would ever believe us, but we were almost always right. Most of the time, people didn't want anything to do with the person who filed the complaint. They just wanted to be left alone. They were okay with the toxicity. It wasn't that they liked the toxicity, it's just that they weren't ready to do battle. What they resented more than the toxic boss was the employee who dragged them into a battle they didn't want to fight. That's where I think we are right now with the UN. The UN couldn't have made it more clear that they didn't want to be brought into this battle. This isn't their fight. Now, here's what this administration is getting wrong. They think because the UN doesn't want to be dragged into this battle, that the UN doesn't support us. That's not true. But what we did is similar to what the charging party would do to their co-workers. They would make the decision that they had had enough and that they were going to drag everybody into their battle. And I'm not saying that their battle wasn't correct, their battle was mistimed. The people that they wanted to fight with them weren't ready to fight. Blaming our allies for not supporting us in a battle that they wanted no part of from the beginning is wrong. So here's my advice to the Trump administration. Stop being assholes to the UN. You picked a fight without their consent. You can't be angry at them for not wanting to be in this fight with you. They haven't stopped being our allies. When the charging party filed a charge with EEOC, most of the time they're ready to fight. And they understand the risks to their home, their family, their job, their security, everything. But that doesn't mean their coworkers are ready for that same fight. And to expect their coworkers to have that same level of passion for the fight is unreasonable. And to be angry at their coworkers for not willing to take the same risk is also unreasonable. And here's what we get really sticky, because the charging parties take all of the slings and the arrows and all the bad stuff, and they would be the ones who would change the environment and make it better for everybody. They were the heroes. Sometimes there would be a lot of resentment, and they would tell me how difficult it was for them to stay in that company with those people because they felt that those people had no right to reap the benefit off of them because they didn't put in the work. And I would have to explain to them that what they did was noble, but it wasn't their coworkers' fault that the workplace was toxic. Their coworkers were never the problem. The people who were toxic were the problem. The fact that their coworkers were not ready to engage in the battle to get rid of that toxicity wasn't the problem. And they needed to know how to separate those two. Not wanting to fight in a battle is not the same thing as causing the problem that starts the battle. It's not the same thing as being the reason for that battle. And you have to know how to separate those two. I understand why this administration is angry at the UN, but the UN is not the problem. Iran is the problem. This administration has decided that they have to deal with Iran now. That is their decision. The UN has decided they did not want to deal with Iran right now. That is their decision. This administration cannot be angry at the UN for their decision, because the UN did not say, "We have your back," and then renege on that decision. The UN made it clear, "We do not have your back. Do not make this decision." We made that decision despite that. So that's on us. Now, the UN has never said, "We're no longer your allies." But the UN has been very clear in their boundaries, and we have to respect their boundaries. Now, I know this administration has a problem with boundaries, but the UN is right. And I hope this administration learns something from what happened, because this was a learning experience, which was you have to respect the sovereignty of nations. If we want our sovereignty respected, we have to respect the sovereignty of others. And no means no. I know that's a hard one, but no does mean no. And yelling at somebody because their no meant no, that's kind of a punk move.